3 years ago, a military spouse publicly called me a homewrecker. Just for holding my Japanese husband's hand, when I told her he was my husband, she smirked and said, "You make us wives look like whores." I stayed silent then. But today, she bowed before me, hands shaking, and begged for my forgiveness. Imagine being publicly shamed, called a homewrecker, and worse, just for holding your husband's hand. Sounds crazy, right? But what happened after that moment of utter disbelief? That's where the real story and the most satisfying comeuppance truly began. My husband and we've lived here in Japan for over 2 years now. This is his hometown, and honestly, it's been an adventure. We're an AMWF couple, that's Asian man, white female, and in rural Japan, let me tell you, we stick out like a rare shiny Pokemon. We get a lot of staring, sometimes secret pictures, or if an old lady's brave enough, a quick chat. It can be pretty awkward, especially at a restaurant, with kids turning around, mouths agape, just staring at us the whole time. Now, coincidentally, there's a small US military base right here in our city, so the closer you get downtown, the more American families you see. The military presence really shapes life here, from the economy to how locals perceive foreigners. And me? I'm constantly mistaken for military, by Americans and Japanese alike. Besides me, I only know 5 other interracial marriages here. Locals always ask me about my American husband when I'm out alone, and I just calmly respond in Japanese, "My husband is Japanese, and I live here." Americans never even ask. They just assume my spouse is American. One day, it was beautiful and warm, the first in months. So, we decided to brave the parking war and just walk around the shops. The season for new American military families had just wrapped up, so it was probably a lot of people's first time out shopping leisurely. We found a spot and started walking, hand in hand, laughing and just enjoying the day. Then I heard it. Wow! It came from an American woman about 10 feet behind us, loud enough to make me turn around. She was with 2 other moms, and they each had about 3 kids with them. All of them were just staring at me. Then she said it, cutting through the sunshine like a knife. Seriously, another little homewrecker doing this in public. My blood ran cold. We eventually found a table at the outdoor Starbucks. My husband and I were just enjoying our drinks when, unbelievably, the same women approached, pushing their strollers right up to our table. The lead woman squared her shoulders. "Excuse me," she said, her voice dripping with venom, "but you need to keep whatever you're doing in your messed up home? Doing that in public in front of families is disgusting and immoral." I was completely confused, and so was my English-speaking husband. "Who knew drinking coffee outside was a crime?" I asked, genuinely bewildered. "I'm sorry, what did we do?" She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at my wedding ring. "You know exactly what you're doing." Then she scoffed. "Good Lord, does your husband know? Is he on a ship? That's so like a dependopotamus." Her friends actually snickered. It clicked. She thought I was a military spouse, publicly cheating on my American husband. And honestly, I started laughing. Not a polite chuckle, but a full, incredulous laugh. She was accusing me of cheating on my husband. With my husband. "This is my spouse," I explained, finally regaining my composure. "I'm not part of the military community. I have a Japanese visa." She looked my husband up and down, a sneer twisting her lips. Her friends mumbled apologies, looking uncomfortable, but she clearly didn't believe me. "No one would voluntarily live in this little town," she declared. "You make all us wives look like, who's your husband and what's his rank? I need your dependent ID. My husband's high rank, so he'll make sure your husband knows about your infidelity." She even pulled out her phone, as if to prove some point. My husband, Ray, suggested we just leave, but I wasn't having it. "Stop," I said, my voice firm. "What you're saying is extremely offensive. I was military myself, and what you're doing is against spousal conduct." She just smirked. "Go ahead and tell my high-ranking husband. He's an E7 and everything will be swept under the rug. You can't touch me." Well, I complied with her demand. Later that very day, I ran into my friend who works on base as an event coordinator. I explained the entire bewildering exchange and how uncomfortable it had made my husband. My friend listened, then asked if the person looked like so-and-so. "Yes," I exclaimed. "She arrived months ago and is already causing problems with rumors and drama. Now we have a ruckus, too." My friend shook her head. "I'll make sure this is passed on." 6 months went by. Not a peep. Then, last week, I ran into my friend again. She was busy packing up her office, getting ready to return to the States. Remember that woman who accused you of cheating and called your husband ruckus names? She asked. Well, I told my boss someone was bothering civilians and demanding IDs, which definitely isn't allowed. She paused, a glint in her eye. He was extremely interested, because she was scheduled for an interview in your department. My jaw dropped. I suggested they check her social media. And oh, did they. Her Twitter was a cesspool, littered with racist slang, colorful language, and posts bragging about using her husband's rank to bully others. She even made it clear she wanted the city to burn and asked why anyone would bother learning Japanese. Because it sounds terrible. My boss, who by the way is Japanese, and I printed out her most extreme posts. And still, we invited her to the interview. She showed up, of course, confident even. I was there sitting in on the interview. When asked for 3 good things about herself, she confidently stated, dependent, gets things done, and friendly. She paused, clearly thinking she'd nailed it. But then her confidence evaporated as my boss calmly reached for his phone. Her face went pale. She was floored, sputtering that someone must have hacked her account, despite at least 3 years of slanderous tweets staring back at us. We thanked her for coming, of course, but made it clear we couldn't accept an employee with that kind of conduct. As far as I know, she's still not working. Some spouses found her Twitter not long after the interview, and those screenshots were shared in all departments. No one will touch her application now. I looked at my friend. So, all this was discovered because I told you about her accusations? Yep, my friend confirmed. Oh, and she's kind of an outcast socially right now because she cheated on her husband a couple of months ago. I couldn't believe what I just heard. The woman who had harassed us, who had demanded to see my ID and made those awful comments about my husband had actually cheated on her own spouse. The hypocrisy was staggering. My friend glanced at her watch, grabbed her coffee cup. She had to get back to finish packing her office, but before she left, she leaned in closer. Remember how she kept mentioning her husband's high rank? Well, turns out he filed for divorce last month. Word travels fast on base, especially when someone's been making enemies left and right. I watched my friend hurry back toward the base, then headed home myself. Ray was already there working on his laptop in the living room. I told him everything my friend had shared. He shook his head slowly, then said something that surprised me. Actually, I ran into her at the grocery store yesterday. She was with her kids, and when she saw me, she literally turned her cart around and went the other direction. That evening, I decided to check social media out of curiosity. Her Twitter account was gone, completely deleted, but screenshots live forever in military spouse groups. Someone had compiled a greatest hits collection of her worst posts. There were comments about how Japanese people were backwards, how American women who married Asian men were race traitors, and dozens of posts bragging about getting special treatment because of her husband's rank. The next morning, I had errands to run downtown. At the post office, I noticed a familiar face in line ahead of me. It was one of the women who'd been with her that day at Starbucks, the one who'd apologized. She recognized me immediately, and her face flushed. She stepped out of line and approached me. "I'm so sorry about what happened that day," she said, her voice quiet. We tried to tell her to stop, but she wouldn't listen. She's been nothing but trouble since she arrived. "Did you know she tried to get the manager at the commissary fired because he's Filipino? Said he shouldn't be allowed to work around American families." I thanked her for the apology, and we parted ways. But the encounter got me thinking about how many other people she might have targeted. Ray and I had been relatively lucky. We'd only dealt with her once, and I'd had connections to report her behavior. But what about others who didn't have those resources? 2 days later, I was at my favorite local bakery when the owner, Mrs. Tanaka, mentioned something interesting. A loud American woman had come in last week demanding they serve American-style pastries. When Mrs. Tanaka explained they were a traditional Japanese bakery, the woman had started yelling about how businesses near the base should cater to Americans. She'd even threatened to leave bad reviews online. The description matched perfectly. I showed Mrs. Tanaka against American children. Over the next few weeks, I heard similar stories from other local business owners. The woman had been on a rampage targeting anyone she deemed inferior or un-American. A Korean restaurant owner told me she'd complained about the smell of kimchi. The Indian family who ran the convenience store said she'd demanded they stop playing Bollywood music because it was offensive to American ears. But karma has a way of catching up. 3 weeks after my conversation with my friend, I was at the base exchange picking up some things when I overheard 2 women talking near the shampoo aisle. "Did you hear what happened at the spouse club meeting?" one asked. She showed up uninvited and tried to nominate herself for president. When they told her she wasn't even a member anymore, she started screaming about discrimination. The other woman lowered her voice. I heard her husband's command is transferring him early because of all the complaints, not just from civilians but from other military families too. She apparently tried to pull rank on a colonel's wife at the gym. I finished my shopping and headed to the parking lot, where I nearly walked straight into her. She was loading groceries into her car, her 3 kids arguing in the back seat. When she saw me, her face went through several expressions: recognition, anger, then something like fear. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Then she opened her mouth, and I braced myself for another confrontation. But instead, she just got in her car and drove away, tires squealing slightly as she pulled out too fast. Ray found the whole situation fascinating from a sociological perspective. That evening, he pulled up some research about military spouse culture and entitlement. It's interesting, he said, showing me an article. There's this whole subset of spouses who derive their entire identity from their partner's rank. When that's threatened, they lash out. A month passed without any incidents. Then, while having lunch with a Japanese friend who worked as a translator on base, I learned more details. She was actually flagged in the system, my friend explained. After your complaint and several others, security was notified. She's not banned from base, but she's on a watch list. Any more incidents, and her privileges could be revoked. My friend continued, and get this, she applied for jobs at 5 different departments. Every single one checked her social media, history, and found those screenshots. HR actually uses her as an example now in their cultural sensitivity training. They show her tweets as examples of what not to post. I thought that would be the end of it, but small towns have a way of creating unexpected encounters. 6 weeks after the Twitter revelation, Ray and I were at the annual Cherry Blossom Festival. It was a beautiful day, with families spreading blankets under the blooming trees. We'd found a perfect spot and were enjoying homemade onigiri when I spotted her across the park. She was alone this time, sitting on a bench while her kids played nearby. What struck me was how isolated she looked. Other American families were clustered together, laughing and talking, but she sat apart, scrolling through her phone. When one of her kids ran too far, she called them back sharply, glancing around as if worried about being judged. Ray noticed where I was looking. Do you want to move? He asked. But I shook my head. We had as much right to enjoy the festival as anyone else. Besides, she seemed to be actively avoiding looking in our direction. Later, as we walked through the festival stalls, we passed near her bench. Her youngest child, who couldn't have been more than 4, dropped his toy right in front of us. Ray picked it up and handed it back with a smile. The child said, "Thank you," in the sweet way little kids do, and for just a moment, I saw her face soften as she watched the interaction. But the moment passed quickly. She grabbed her child's hand and walked away without a word. One of the other American moms nearby shook her head. She's been like that for months now, the woman said quietly. Won't talk to anyone, shows. Up to events alone. I almost feel bad for her kids. The real climax came 2 weeks later. I was volunteering at the International Friendship event the city hosted quarterly. It was meant to bring together locals and the international community, including military families. I was helping at the registration table when she walked in with her children. The event coordinator, a lovely Japanese woman named Satosan, greeted them warmly, but when she saw who it was, her smile faltered slightly. I'd heard through the grapevine that this was the same woman who'd complained about the festival being too Japanese-focused. She registered her kids for the children's activities, then stood awkwardly near the entrance. Other military families were mingling with locals, trying different foods, and participating in cultural exchanges, but she just stood there, occasionally checking her phone. Then something unexpected happened. Her middle child, a girl about 7, ran up to a group of Japanese children who were learning to fold origami. Without hesitation, she sat down and tried to copy their movements. One of the Japanese mothers helping with the activity smiled and showed her how to make the folds properly. I watched as the woman's expression changed. She took a tentative step forward, then another. When her daughter held up a completed paper crane, beaming with pride, she actually smiled, a genuine smile, not the smirk I remembered from our encounter. The Japanese mother gestured for her to sit down and try. For a moment, she hesitated. Then, perhaps realizing she had nowhere else to go, she sat down and picked up a piece of paper. Her movements were clumsy at first, but the Japanese mother patiently guided her hands. I had to return to the registration table, but I kept glancing over. She stayed there for nearly an hour, learning alongside her children. When they finally left, each child carried several origami creations. As they passed the registration table, Our eyes met briefly. She didn't say anything, but she nodded, a small acknowledgement that felt somehow significant. Ray picked me up after the event ended. I told him what I'd witnessed, and he made an observation that stuck with me. People can change, he said, but usually only when they hit rock bottom. Maybe losing her marriage, her job prospects, and her social standing was what it took. The epilogue to this story came just last week. We were at our favorite restaurant celebrating our anniversary when the owner came to our table. He thanked us for being regular customers, then mentioned something surprising. The American woman, who caused trouble before. She came last week with her children. She apologized for her behavior and asked if she could learn to make proper Japanese tea. I was shocked. As we walked home that night, hand in hand, just like that day at Starbucks, I reflected on how much had changed. The woman who'd accused me of being a homewrecker had herself become the pariah she'd tried to make me. But perhaps, just perhaps, she was learning what I'd known all along. That love, respect, and kindness transcend borders. And that judging others often reveals more about ourselves than those we judge. Ray squeezed my hand as we reached our door. You know what the real irony is? He said. If she just minded her own business that day, none of this would have happened. She created her own downfall. He was right, of course. But as I looked at my wonderful husband, I realized something else. Her hatred and prejudice had only made our love stronger and our place in this community more secure. In trying to tear us down, she'd ultimately lifted us up while destroying herself. Sometimes, the universe has a sense of justice after all. But the universe wasn't done teaching lessons yet. 2 weeks after our anniversary dinner, I was grocery shopping when I noticed her in the produce section. She was alone this time. No children in sight, carefully selecting vegetables. I tried to avoid her, but the store was small, and we ended up in the same checkout line. She was 2 people ahead of me, and I watched as she fumbled with her wallet, counting out exact change. The cashier waited patiently as she searched for a few more yen. Without thinking, I stepped forward and placed a 1,000-yen note on the counter. She turned, saw me, and her face went through a complex series of emotions. She started to refuse, but the line was growing behind us. She took the money, mumbled something that might have been thanks, and hurried out. The next day, I found an envelope tucked under my car's windshield wiper. Inside was the 1,000 yen and a note written in shaky handwriting. Thank you. I'm sorry for everything. I didn't think much of it until Ray mentioned seeing her at the community center, signing up for Japanese language classes. The instructor later told me she'd asked specifically about learning phrases. She chose to stay and finish what she started here. This revelation changed my perspective. I'd assumed she was staying because she had to, but choosing to remain in a place where she'd burned so many bridges showed either determination or desperation. Maybe both. Over the following weeks, I started noticing her around town more often. She was always alone, always working. I saw her delivering newspapers in the early morning, cleaning offices in the evening, and studying Japanese. At the library during her breaks. She'd gone from demanding special treatment to taking any job she could find. Ray and I discussed it one evening. She's rebuilding from scratch, he observed. That takes courage, even if it's born from necessity. But I wasn't ready to forgive and forget. The memory of her venomous comments about my husband still stung, yet I couldn't deny she was trying. When I saw her bow properly to Mr. Yamamoto at the grocery store and apologize in broken but sincere Japanese for her past rudeness, something shifted slightly. The real test came during the summer festival. I was helping coordinate the event with Sato-san when we realized we were short-staffed for the food stalls. Someone suggested asking the American woman, since she'd been working at the bakery. Sato-san hesitated, remembering the previous complaints, but we needed the help. She agreed to ask. To everyone's surprise, the woman not only accepted, but showed up an hour early to help with setup. She worked the yakitori stall all day without complaint, even when the heat became oppressive and the work exhausting. During a brief break, I found myself standing next to her as we both grabbed water. She looked at me, seemed about to speak, then just nodded and went back to work. But later, when a customer complained loudly in English about the food being too foreign, she stepped in. This is a Japanese festival serving traditional Japanese food. If you want American food, there's a McDonald's down the street. The customer left in a huff, and she went back to serving yakitori as if nothing had happened. Word of her defense spread quickly through the volunteer network. Some people were skeptical, wondering if it was just an act. Others thought she was trying too hard to compensate, but Mrs. Tanaka told me something interesting. She asked me to teach her how to make traditional sweets for the festival, she said. When I asked why, she said she wanted to understand what she'd dismissed before. She's been studying the history and cultural significance of each recipe. 3 months into her transformation, I encountered her at the library. She was surrounded by Japanese textbooks and cultural guides making detailed notes. When she saw me, she didn't flee or ignore me. Instead, she stood and bowed. In careful Japanese, she said, "I need to apologize properly for my behavior. I was wrong about everything. I disrespected you, your husband, and this culture. I'm trying to learn and make amends." Her pronunciation was off, but the effort was clear. I didn't know how to respond. Ray and I had talked about forgiveness, about second chances, but facing her directly made it complicated. I simply nodded and said, "Learning is good." She seemed to understand that was all she'd get for now and returned to her studies. The librarian later told me she was there every day, studying for hours. She'd even started helping other foreigners who came in looking for Japanese learning resources. The situation became more complex when her estranged husband returned to Japan for the divorce proceedings. He showed up at various places around town, loud and demanding, insisting she return to America immediately. She refused, stating she had work obligations and debts to repay. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, that she was now defending her right to stay in the country she'd once insulted. When he tried to create a scene at the bakery, she handled it with surprising composure, asking him to leave in both English and Japanese, citing workplace disruption. He escalated by spreading rumors that she'd lost her mind, that she was being brainwashed by the locals. Some of the military families who remembered her previous behavior were all too willing to believe it. But those of us who saw her daily knew differently. She was soberer than she'd ever been, just humbled and focused on survival. When he tried to involve base authorities, claiming she was harassing military families by staying in town, the complaint went nowhere. She hadn't been near the base or any military families in months. The divorce proceedings revealed more about her situation. She'd given up any claim to military benefits or support in exchange for a quick divorce and keeping her visa status. She was truly starting over with nothing. Some people admired her determination. Others thought she was foolish. Ray pointed out that she was doing what many immigrants do, surviving on multiple jobs while learning the language and culture. The difference was, she'd had a choice and squandered it, and now was living with the consequences. A turning point came when Mrs. Tanaka fell ill and couldn't run the bakery for a week. Without being asked, the woman opened the shop every morning, managed the daily operations, and deposited every yen in Mrs. Tanaka's account. She even learned to make Mrs. Tanaka's signature melon pan, following the recipe exactly. Customers were surprised but not disappointed. When Mrs. Tanaka returned, she found her business running smoothly and her regular customers satisfied. That's when she offered the woman a proper position as assistant baker, with fair wages and stable hours. The announcement caused mixed reactions in town. Some felt she didn't deserve such an opportunity after her past behavior. Others believed in redemption. I found myself somewhere in the middle, watching and waiting. She proved herself reliable, arriving early, staying late when needed, and slowly earning the trust of regular customers. She learned their names, remembered their usual orders, and even picked up enough Japanese to have basic conversations. 6 months after her public downfall, she was a different person. Gone was the entitled military spouse who demanded special treatment. In her place was a tired but determined woman working to rebuild her life. She'd lost weight from the physical work, her hands were rough from constant washing and kneading dough, and she moved with the efficiency of someone who couldn't afford to waste time. When new military families arrived and acted dismissively toward local businesses, she was the first to gently correct them, explaining in English why respect and adaptation were essential. But the past has a way of resurfacing. One day, a new military spouse came into the bakery, someone who'd known her before. The woman tried to shame her, loudly announcing to everyone present about her past behavior, her divorce, her fall from grace. The shop fell silent. I was there, buying my usual Friday pastries, and watched as she stood behind the counter, absorbing the verbal assault. When the woman finished, expecting her to crumble or lash out, she simply said, "You're right, I did all those things. I was wrong. Now I'm trying to be better. Would you like to try our special today?" The attacker left without buying anything, but something significant had happened. The regular customers who'd witnessed months of her quiet dedication began speaking up. Mr. Sato mentioned how she'd helped carry his groceries when he was recovering from surgery. Mrs. Kimura talked about how she'd started learning the names of traditional sweets in Japanese. Even the initially skeptical teenager who worked part-time admitted she always cleaned up without being asked, and shared her tips equally. Ray and I discussed this latest incident that evening. "She's paying her dues," he said. In Japanese culture, that continuous effort to improve and make amends carries weight. But I wondered if she was truly changing or just adapting for survival. The answer came unexpectedly through her children. They visited during school break, and I saw them at the park. Instead of the wild behavior from before, they were quiet and respectful. When they saw local children playing, the eldest asked in basic Japanese if they could join. She'd been teaching them, preparing them to be respectful visitors in the country their mother had once despised. The visit revealed another layer to her transformation. She took them to various local spots, explaining in simple terms why each place was important to the community. At the shrine, I watched her teach them how to pray properly. At the restaurant, she helped them order in Japanese and use chopsticks correctly. When her youngest complained about missing American food, she gently explained they were guests in Japan and should appreciate local cuisine. The same woman who demanded American-style everything was now raising her children to be culturally aware. Her ex-husband arrived to collect the children, and the contrast was stark. He complained loudly about everything: the food, the weather, the language barrier, while she quietly translated and apologized to anyone he offended. When he demanded she return to America for the children's sake, she wasn't crying, just staring at the cherry trees. I sat on a nearby bench, not too close but within speaking distance. We sat in silence for a while before she spoke. "I used to hate it here. Thought everything should change to accommodate me. Now I realize I was the one who needed to change." She paused, then added, "I know you and your husband have every reason to dislike me. I said terrible things. I just want you to know I'm trying to be better." I thought about all the changes I'd witnessed, the daily effort she put into her work and studies, the humility she developed through hardship. "You're doing the work," I finally said. "That matters." She nodded, understanding that this wasn't forgiveness, but acknowledgement. We parted without more words, but something had shifted. The next time we passed on the street, we exchanged brief nods. Ray noticed and commented that sometimes the best revenge is letting people live with the consequences of their actions while choosing to move forward ourselves. The seasonal festivals became markers of her progress. During the autumn festival, she worked multiple food stalls, switching seamlessly between tasks. By winter, she was helping coordinate volunteers, using her improving Japanese to bridge communication gaps between foreign and local participants. When spring came again, marking a full year since our confrontation, she was an established part of the community workforce. Not beloved, perhaps, but respected for her dedication and reliability. The transformation wasn't without setbacks. Some military families continued to shun her, and she occasionally faced reminders of her past behavior. When a new family arrived and heard the stories, they tried to rally others against her, claiming she was a traitor to the military community. But by then, she had enough local support that their efforts failed. Business owners who'd once complained about her now defended her work ethic. Even some military spouses who'd witnessed her changes spoke up, suggesting everyone deserved a second chance. I learned more about her daily life through various sources. She lived in a tiny apartment above a shop, barely larger than a military dorm room. She ate simple meals, often leftovers from the bakery or discounted groceries. Every extra yen went towards savings for her children's visits or paying off debts from her divorce. She studied Japanese by candlelight to save electricity, practiced conversations with elderly neighbors who appreciated the company, and volunteered at community events to build connections and practice the language. Ray found her story academically fascinating, a real-world example of forced adaptation and cultural immersion. He even mentioned it to his colleagues, though without identifying details. They discussed how extreme circumstances could catalyze genuine change, how losing everything sometimes led to finding oneself. But for me, it remained personal. Every interaction carried the weight of that first confrontation, the memory of her racism and entitlement. Yet, I couldn't deny the evidence of change accumulating day by day. The second summer brought a crisis that tested everyone. A typhoon hit the region, causing widespread damage. The community rallied to help those affected, and she was among the first to volunteer. She worked tirelessly, helping elderly residents clear debris, translating for emergency services, and organizing supply distribution. When the bakery flooded, she spent days helping Mrs. Tanaka salvage what they could and clean up the damage. Her hands were cut and bleeding from handling broken glass and debris, but she never complained or stopped working. During the recovery, efforts, something remarkable happened. She was paired with my husband's elderly aunt for cleanup duty. Aunt Co was initially resistant, having heard about the past incidents, but as they worked together, clearing mud from her garden, she witnessed the same dedication others had seen. By the end of the day, Aunt Co was teaching her traditional songs to make the work go faster. When I arrived to check on them, I found them laughing together, covered in mud, but working in harmony. That evening, Aunt Co called us. "That American woman," she said, "she's not so bad now. Works harder than most young people, knows her place and shows proper respect." Ray and I exchanged glances. If Aunt Co, who was notoriously critical of foreigners, could see the change, it was significant. But I still held back, watching and waiting. Trust once broken required more than good deeds to rebuild. It needed consistency, time, and genuine transformation, not just behavioral modification for survival. The approaching anniversary of our confrontation made me reflective. 2 years had passed since that day at Starbucks when she'd accused me of being a homewrecker. In that time, she'd gone from entitled military spouse to divorced single mother working multiple jobs in a foreign country. She'd learned a new language, adapted to a culture she'd once despised, and built a life from nothing. Whether driven by necessity or genuine change, the results were undeniable. She'd become what she'd once mocked, a foreigner trying to fit into Japanese society. A week before the anniversary, I encountered her at the market. She was helping an elderly man carry his groceries, chatting with him in improving Japanese about his grandchildren. When she saw me, she finished helping him before approaching. In careful Japanese, she asked if we could talk. I agreed, curious about what she wanted to say. We found a quiet corner and she pulled out a worn piece of paper. She'd written a formal apology in Japanese, clearly practiced many times. She read it aloud, stumbling over some words but pushing through. The apology was comprehensive, acknowledging specific wrongs, expressing genuine remorse, and outlining how she'd tried to make amends. She didn't ask for forgiveness or friendship, just the opportunity to deliver the apology she'd been practicing for months. When she finished, she bowed deeply and held it, waiting. I accepted the apology formally, following Japanese custom. We weren't friends, might never be, but the ritual had meaning. She'd learned enough about the culture to know that proper apologies required humility, specificity, and patience. As the 2-year mark approached, I realized her story had become part of our community's narrative. New arrivals heard about the American woman who'd fallen from grace and rebuilt herself through hard work and humility. Some saw it as a cautionary tale about cultural arrogance. Others viewed it as proof that people could change. For the Japanese locals, it reinforced their values of perseverance, humility, and the possibility of redemption through sustained effort. For the military community, reactions remained mixed, but even critics acknowledged her transformation. Ray and I often discussed what it all meant. He saw it as validation that consequences could drive genuine change. I remained more cautious, but I couldn't deny what I witnessed daily. The woman who demanded special treatment now waited patiently in lines. The person who'd insulted Japanese language now studied it diligently. The mother who'd let her children run wild now taught them respect and cultural awareness. Whether the change was authentic or adaptive didn't matter as much as its consistency and impact. The climax of this middle chapter came unexpectedly. Mrs. Tanaka decided to retire and offered to sell the bakery to her assistant. The news shocked everyone, including the American woman. She had no money for such a purchase, but Mrs. Tanaka had a plan. She'd structured a payment system based on future profits, essentially betting on her assistant's continued dedication. The risk was significant for both parties. If the business failed, Mrs. Tanaka would lose her retirement investment. If it succeeded, the American woman would own a piece of the community she'd once rejected. The decision created a stir. Some locals felt a foreigner shouldn't own such a traditional establishment. Others argued she'd earned the opportunity through 2 years of hard work. The military community was equally divided. Some saw it as betrayal of American values, while others admired her entrepreneurial spirit. But the ultimate decision rested with the 2 women involved. After much deliberation and negotiation, they reached an agreement. The American woman would take over operations with a 5-year payment plan, maintaining all traditional recipes and practices. The transfer ceremony was small, but significant. Mrs. Tanaka handed over the keys and recipes she'd guarded for decades. The American woman accepted them with tears in her eyes, bowing deeply and promising in Japanese to honor the trust placed in her. Regular customers watched with mixed emotions, some worried about changes, others curious about the future. But when the bakery reopened under new management, Everything remained the same. The same recipes, the same quality, the same dedication to service. I visited on opening day, partly from curiosity and partly from a sense of completing a circle. She was behind the counter wearing the traditional baker's outfit. When suppliers tested her with higher prices, assuming a foreigner would be easy to exploit, she negotiated in Japanese, demonstrating her knowledge of fair market rates. Slowly, grudgingly, the community accepted that their bakery was in capable hands. Her children visited again, and this time they worked in the bakery, learning alongside their mother. The eldest showed real talent for baking, carefully following Mrs. Tanaka's recipes. The transformation was complete when I overheard the youngest telling a new military child that they needed to respect Japanese culture because this is their country and we're guests here. The same family that had embodied cultural arrogance now modeled cultural respect. As this middle chapter of the story draws to a close, the stage is set for final resolution. The woman who'd accused me of being a homewrecker had lost everything: her marriage, her status, her community, only to rebuild herself through humility and hard work. She'd gone from demanding that Japan accommodate her to adapting herself to Japan. The bakery represented more than business ownership. It symbolized acceptance earned through sustained effort and genuine change. But questions remained. Could someone truly change so fundamentally, or was this elaborate survival adaptation? Would the military community ever fully accept her transformation? How would her children navigate between their mother's new life and their father's traditional military world? And for Ray and me, how do we process witnessing such a complete reversal of someone who'd attacked our marriage and insulted our love? The answers would come in the final chapter, as all the threads wove together. The universe had indeed delivered justice, but not in the simple, satisfying way we might expect. Instead, it offered something more complex: a meditation on redemption, consequences, and the possibility of genuine change. The woman who'd tried to tear others down had been forced to rebuild herself from nothing, and in doing so, had become something she never expected, a humble member of the community she'd once despised. The irony was complete. She now lived the life she'd mocked, working hard in a foreign country, speaking a language she'd called terrible, serving people she'd considered inferior. But perhaps that was the universe's true justice. Not destruction, but transformation. Not revenge, but the slow, difficult work of becoming better. As I reflected on everything that had happened, I realized that her story had become part of our story. A reminder that judgment and prejudice ultimately harm the one who harbors them most. The bakery's success under her management became undeniable. After 6 months, sales actually increased slightly, partly because curious locals wanted to see the transformation for themselves, but mostly because she maintained Mrs. Tanaka's exacting standards while adding small touches like handwritten thank you notes in Japanese for regular customers. I noticed these details during my weekly visits, watching her interact with customers in increasingly fluent Japanese, remembering not just their orders but their grandchildren's names and asking about sick relatives. One morning, I arrived to find a commotion outside the bakery. 3 American military wives stood at the entrance, and I recognized one as the woman who'd publicly shamed her months earlier. They were speaking loudly in English about boycotting businesses that employed people who disrespected the military community. She stood behind the counter, calmly serving other customers while they ranted outside. When they entered and demanded to speak to the owner, she simply said in English that she was the owner and asked how she could help them. The lead woman launched into a tirade about loyalty and American values, but she listened without interrupting. When the woman finished, she responded in measured English that she understood their feelings but had work to do. She offered them free samples of the day's special, a traditional Japanese sweet she had perfected under Mrs. Tanaka's guidance. 2 of the women refused, but one accepted, tasting it hesitantly. Her eyes widened at the flavor, and she quietly asked for the price of a full box. This small crack in their united front widened when the woman explained in English the cultural significance of the sweet, how it was traditionally given as a peace offering. The woman who'd accepted the sample bought a box, ignoring her friend's glares. As they left, she turned back and said something that surprised everyone present. "I heard you helped during the typhoon cleanup. My Japanese neighbor mentioned you worked on her house for 2 days straight without payment." The lead antagonist tried to pull her friend away, but the damage was done. Word would spread through the military community that perhaps the narrative wasn't as simple as they'd believed. Her ex-husband made another appearance 3 weeks later, this time with legal documents. He'd found a lawyer who argued she'd abandoned her children by staying in Japan. She met him at a local cafe, bringing her own documentation, employment records, bank statements showing regular money transfers for the children's support, and letters from the children themselves asking to visit again. I happened to be at the next table and watched as she calmly presented evidence of her stability and financial responsibility. He grew increasingly agitated as she spoke in careful English about establishing a life that could provide for their children's future education. When he slammed his hand on the table and called her delusional, she didn't flinch. Instead, she pulled out a folder containing printed emails where he'd agreed to the current arrangement in exchange for a quick divorce. His lawyer reviewed the documents and quietly advised him they had no case. He stormed out, but not before. She said loudly enough for others to hear that the children were always welcome to visit, and she'd continue sending support regardless of his behavior. The encounter spread through both communities. Some military spouses began questioning the narrative they'd been fed about her being an unstable deserter. Local Japanese residents who witnessed it praised her composure and dedication to her children despite the distance. Even Ray's Aunt Ko, who'd become something of an unexpected ally, started telling her mahjong group about the American woman who honored her obligations while building an honest life. 2 months later, during Golden Week, her children returned for an extended visit. This time they stayed for 2 weeks, fully immersing in local life. I watched them help in the bakery each morning, the eldest teaching the younger ones Japanese phrases for different pastries. They attended the local School for Cultural Exchange Days, wearing proper uniforms she'd carefully prepared. When other American military children visited the bakery and made comments about weird Japanese food, her youngest firmly corrected them in both languages, explaining why such comments were disrespectful. The real test came when a group of military wives organized a boycott of the bakery, creating a Facebook group dedicated to warning others about supporting someone who'd betrayed American values. The group grew to about 50 members within days, but then something unexpected happened. Local Japanese customers, many of whom had Facebook accounts to stay connected with international friends, began posting reviews in English about their experiences. Mrs. Yamamoto wrote about how she'd helped elderly customers carry groceries. Mr. Sato described her volunteering at the community center, teaching English to Japanese children. The tide turned when Vic, a respected military spouse who'd lived in Japan for over a decade, posted a lengthy response. She detailed witnessing the woman's transformation firsthand, from the entitled newcomer to someone who'd earned respect, through consistent hard work and genuine cultural adaptation. She ended her post with a simple question that resonated throughout the community. Isn't the ability to admit mistakes, learn, and grow exactly the kind of American value we should celebrate? The boycott group gradually lost momentum, especially after several members quietly visited the bakery and found themselves treated with the same courtesy as any other customer. One woman even apologized privately, admitting she'd joined the group based on rumors without knowing the full story. She became a regular customer, bringing her Japanese neighbors who'd previously felt unwelcome in establishments frequented by Americans. Her business acumen surprised everyone when she proposed a cultural exchange program through the bakery. She offered free Japanese baking classes for military spouses in exchange for English conversation practice for local residents. The program required approval from both communities, and initially both sides resisted. But she persisted, presenting the idea at community meetings in increasingly confident Japanese and at spouse gatherings in diplomatic English. The breakthrough came when Colonel Mac's wife, Victoria, attended one of these presentations. She'd heard various versions of the story and came to form her own opinion. After listening to the proposal and witnessing the woman's respectful presentation in both languages, she became an unexpected advocate. With her influence, the program launched as a pilot, starting with just 5 participants from each community. I attended, watching her teach American women to make traditional Japanese sweets while facilitating English practice for local residents was surreal. She moved between languages smoothly, patiently correcting pronunciation in both directions and explaining cultural nuances that went beyond mere translation. When one American participant made a dismissive comment about the complexity of Japanese customs, she handled it with grace, explaining how understanding these customs had enriched her life and strengthened her business. The program's success led to expansion. Within 3 months, she was hosting twice-weekly sessions with waiting lists for both groups. Local newspapers picked up the story, focusing not on her past, but on how the bakery had become a bridge between communities. She declined most interview requests, but agreed to one with a Japanese language publication, conducting the entire interview in Japanese and emphasizing her gratitude to the community that had given her a second chance. Her children's next visit coincided with the bakery's 1-year anniversary under her management. Mrs. Tanaka attended the small celebration, publicly praising her former assistant's dedication and growth. The moment that struck me most was when her eldest child gave a short speech in Japanese, thanking the community for accepting their family and teaching them important life lessons. The child's pronunciation was near perfect, and the content showed a maturity beyond their years. During that visit, her ex-husband appeared again, this time more subdued. He attended one of their children's presentations at the local school, where they demonstrated traditional Japanese calligraphy they'd learned. I saw him watching his children interact confidently in both cultures, something he'd never imagined possible. After the presentation, he approached her quietly. They talked for nearly an hour while the children played with their local friends. Later, she told Mrs. Tanaka that he'd finally understood why she'd stayed. Seeing their children thriving in both cultures had opened his eyes to possibilities beyond the military bubble. He'd agreed to a more flexible visitation arrangement, and even expressed interest in learning basic Japanese to better connect with his children's experiences. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was progress toward co-parenting with mutual respect. The second anniversary of our initial confrontation arrived with little fanfare. I found myself at the bakery early that morning, not by design, but by habit. She was already working, preparing the day's first batch of melon pan. When she saw me, she simply nodded and continued working. But as I waited for my order, she placed an extra pastry in my bag, a traditional sweet given to mark significant occasions. We exchanged a look of understanding. No words were needed. Ray and I often discussed the complete transformation we'd witnessed. From the woman who'd accused me of being a homewrecker, to someone who now facilitated cultural understanding. The journey had been remarkable, but what struck us most was how her transformation had rippled through both communities. Military spouses who'd initially shunned her now brought Japanese friends to her cultural exchange sessions. Local residents, who'd been wary of Americans, felt more comfortable interacting with the military community through her programs. The final vindication came when the city awarded her a community service recognition for her cultural bridge-building efforts. The ceremony was small, attended by both Japanese officials and military representatives. She accepted the award with a brief speech in both languages, thanking the community for teaching her the value of humility, hard work, and cultural respect. When she bowed deeply to the audience, the gesture was natural and sincere, a far cry from the woman who'd once demanded others conform to her expectations. As I write this update, it's been 3 years since that confrontation at Starbucks. The woman who tried to shame me for my interracial marriage now facilitates understanding between cultures. Her children visit regularly, moving seamlessly between their American and Japanese identities. The bakery thrives as more than a business. It's become a symbol of redemption and transformation. Last week, I overheard a new military spouse complaining loudly about Japanese customer service at the convenience store. Before I could intervene, another spouse pulled her aside and told her about the American woman who'd lost everything because of cultural arrogance, but rebuilt her life through humility and respect. The story had become a cautionary tale and inspiration within the military community. The universe indeed has a sense of justice, but it's not always the dramatic downfall we might expect or even desire. Sometimes, it's the slow, difficult process of facing consequences and choosing growth over bitterness. The woman who'd embodied the worst stereotypes of American entitlement had become an example of successful cultural integration. She'd lost her marriage, her status, and her community, but gained something more valuable: understanding, respect, and a genuine place in a society she'd once dismissed. Ray and I continue our life here, still occasionally fielding questions about our interracial marriage, but feeling more secure in our community than ever. The incident that had threatened to divide us had ultimately strengthened not just our relationship, but the bonds between two communities that often struggled to understand each other. And at the center of it all, a small bakery run by a woman who'd learned that respect and humility transcend all borders. The irony remains complete. She'd accused me of being a homewrecker while harboring her own secrets. She'd demanded others conform to her expectations while refusing to adapt herself. But through loss and hardship, she'd discovered what I'd known all along: that home isn't about where you're from or who you're with, but how you choose to live and treat others wherever you are. Her transformation from antagonist to bridge builder proves that even the most unlikely people can change when faced with the consequences of their actions and given the opportunity to choose a different path.